Hey everyone, we've been taking a look for the last 3 weeks on the Italian Renaissance, and this week I want to spend some time on how the Renaissance was impacting other regions that were not in Italy. And so today we're going to take a look at some of the art that's emerging in Northern Europe. And what I generally mean by that when we talk about the Northern Renaissance is really anything north of Italy. And so that's going to be places like France, Germany, Belgium, and the like. And so we're going to take a look at how the ideas, although they stemmed from Florence and the rise of the Renaissance with Brunelleschi going down and becoming inspired by the Pantheon, bring these ideas back with Donatello of studying these ancient sculptures and architecture, and that's corresponding to the humanist movement, which is going back to looking at ancient languages to find original meaning. We're going to take a look at how these ideas start transmitting north. They don't just stay in Italy, they start spreading throughout and people become inspired by them. I wanted to take a look at an early Renaissance work. And mainly when we're focusing on the early Northern Renaissance, we're focusing on the 14th century Belgium, specifically in the two regions of Bruges and Ghent. And so these are two small towns in Belgium, but they were particularly important economically and culturally for the 15th century in the north. In fact, the Medicis had branches of their banks in Bruges. So economically, it was extremely important for Belgium because it's on the North Sea, and so it becomes an important port. And so, with the rise of the economic merchants, also comes the rise of being able to pay for art, and so this becomes particularly important, and Ghent is just kind of right up the road, and so Ghent also becomes extremely important. One of the main pieces that come out of the 15th century is this one. This one is known as the Ghent altarpiece, and so this is the altarpiece in one of the churches in Ghent, and this is what it looks like close. And so as an altarpiece, this would be at the very center of a cathedral, and then some days they're going to have it closed, and so this is what it looks like closed. And then on some days, these panels on the outside will swing open, and then they'll have a different image on the inside. And we'll take a look at the inside in just a second. I just want to kind of pull apart the ideas that are on the outside. On the outside panel at the very top, you have Angel Gabriel coming to announce to Mary on the right with a dove above her head, which is symbolic of the Holy Ghost, announcing that she is going to become the mother of Christ. And then down below, you have statues of John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. And so, again, contextualizing this within Christianity and the New Testament. And then on the very bottom, you have the patrons who are paying for Jan van Eyck to work on this, and that's Jodocus Vid and Isabel Barlut, his wife. And so these two individuals are paying for it, and so they get to have their image inscribed as part of this piece, and so it shows their piety, it shows their devotion to God. As we take a look at the panel swinging open, this is what I want us to focus on. So you can see here, these are the hinges that swing open, and then I wanted to focus more on the inside panel and taking a look at the ideas, because the ideas within this piece are going to really establish the main ideas of the Northern Renaissance and how they see the human condition. And I want us to think about some of the similarities and some of the differences between how they're seeing the human condition in Italy versus in Northern Europe. At the very top, you see paintings of sculptures. One is the sacrifice of Cain and Abel, one offering animal sacrifices, another offering grain. And on the other side, you see the murder of Abel. And so what you see here is the ideas of human hubris or arrogance, and that leads to sin and destruction, right? So that's kind of what's overshadowing the work, and it kind of contextualizes the rest of the image. Then if we can just kind of move from the left, this is Adam. And then this is a heavenly choir. This is Mary with her crown and then a nice little halo above her head. And then she's kind of lost in scripture. Generally, like other images of Mary, she's wearing the blue robe, which was a very expensive hue. And so that's generally demonstrates it's reserved for royalty or divinity. And so this shows her divinity and royalty. And then in the very center, you have God the Father sitting on a throne with his crown and also this halo above him. He also holds a scepter. And then below him is another crown. And then this is John the Baptist, who's wearing camel fur and then also pointing towards God or Jesus. And then he's also reading scripture. And then further out here, this is again the heavenly choir. So this kind of these choirs surround the image is the idea here. Then you have Eve on the outside to juxtapose her from Adam. And then down below, going from the left, these are crusaders coming back from a crusade towards the very center. And then these are saints coming to adore the Lamb. This is known as the adoration of the Lamb. The Lamb is on an altar, which is symbolic of Jesus. And then above him is a dove, symbolic of the Holy Ghost. And so in the very center axis, you have God the Father, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost in one kind of plane. And then over here on the far right are pilgrims coming in to worship. And so everyone's kind of coming in the center. But what Jan van Eyck does is he separates this kind of heavenly space from above with the physical world that we live in, but each one of them having a separate kind of importance, a separate kind of role within the idea of Christianity, right? So the idea is that we're coming towards the center, coming towards Christ, and Christ leads us back to God the Father, right? And then the important individuals, Mary and John the Baptist, are all directing towards God and towards Jesus, and so everything is denoting that. But I wanted to focus on the representation of Adam and Eve. Here we see, again, similar to other elements of the Renaissance, the focus on realism. We can even see the intricate chest hairs of Adam. In the eyes, we can see the light coming from the window, this was meant to be placed in situ in a specific location in a cathedral where there was a specific window. And so it was to give you the sense, as you were to go into the room with the altarpiece, it would give you a sense that the lighting felt realistic and natural. On the other side, we see Eve, and of course she's holding the forbidden fruit, which gives them knowledge, and then she kind of is looking off again, directing her attention towards the center where God is. And then here is just a detail of the heavenly choir, which looks like it could be any choir in any ward in the church, kind of doing their own thing and kind of a little bit disgruntled or bored or whatever the case may be. But look at the amount of detail that he puts within the sapphires and the rubies and the pearls. They give you that sense of clarity, right? So the focus is on detail. Very different from what we see with the Italian Renaissance. We do see detail, we do see realism, but what we see with the North is just this immaculate detail. It's like a painting with a microscope to give you the finite points. The Italian Renaissance wanted to give you the idea, the essence, but here we're giving you right, to make it look extremely realistic, right? And mainly the reason that we have this amount of realism is the use of oil paints in the North, which gave them a wider palette in order to use colors. And so we see Jan van Eyck, who is a master of oils, demonstrating his expertise. I love the scepter here with God at the center. He kind of has his fingers extended, his right hand extended as though to give a blessing. But if you take a look at the scepter on our right, you can see the translucence. It's kind of made of a crystal, so you can see the light going through it. And then on the right-hand side, the right-hand detail is a detail of the robe at the very bottom, where you can see the gold inlay in each thread, and then the light that casts through the pearls and the gems on the robe. As we think about them, I want us to think about the Ghent altarpiece in connection with Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, because I think both of them reflect the human condition, but I think both of them reflect the human condition differently. And I think understanding the differences helps us understand what's going on in the North, right? So the similarities, the focus on realism, the focus on detail, the focus on placing ideas within the context of Christianity is still important in both of them. Even though in Italy we see more of a movement towards secularism and more Greco-Roman ideas or pagan ideas, we see that more of an influence in the North. We see that less. But we see the influence of, aesthetically, the focus on realism. But what we also see is the focus in the north more on details. We do see lighting and shading within Michelangelo's piece, but it's not as immaculate, it's not as pristine and crisp as Jan van Eyck's piece. But what we also see is an indication of the human condition. Both of them are very different, right? So as we see with Michelangelo's that we talked about, the idea of Neoplatonism, where God is reaching towards Adam and Adam is reaching back towards God, showing this kind of divine connection and this eternal yearning of the human, spirit, reaching out towards the divine, reaching out towards the eternal realm, kind of reaching beyond, seeing life as this kind of imprisonment or being enslaved by the limitations of our body, and our souls are kind of having this eternal yearning to reach beyond. We see something a little bit different here, right? This idea of separation, this kind of physical separation. God is reaching out his hand for a blessing, but it's not as direct. It's not as connected. The blessing is more of a mystical rather than physical, tangible kind of reaching. This is kind of bless you from a distance, right? As we see with Mary and John the Baptist, they are kind of in their own worlds where we don't really see them kind of connecting. I mean, we've seen similar ideas with Mary kind of apart from the world, particularly with Raphael. But this is kind of more of that physical separation. It's kind of in that heavenly space. And then on the far ends, kind of reaching out towards the outer realm of this world that Jan van Eyck paints, we see Adam and Eve kind of as far away as they can get. And the reason that they're far away is because of sin and knowledge, right? So the idea of human weaknesses separate us from God, where Michelangelo does demonstrate some of that to some extent with the fall of Adam and Eve in a later panel, and then on the drunkenness of Noah, and on also on the flood. He does give us elements of that, but we see that more center stage with Jan van Eyck's piece. We see it more of what separates us from God is our desire to move away from him, right? This idea of knowledge, intellect, relying on ourselves rather than relying on spirituality, right? I also want to focus on the differences between how Jan van Eyck represents God versus how Adam represents God, right? Adam represents God as an artist, using hands as kind of craftsman. But what we see here, Jan van Eyck is again thinking about how do we represent the divine. And we had that question when we examined Giotto and Cimabue and their Madonna and Throne, which look very similar, but they're having a different approach to how they represent the divine. What Jan van Eyck is thinking about here is, what does God look like? How do we represent something better than humanity, but also kind of putting it within the confines of looking like the physical world, knowing that we were created after his image. And so he says, well, what's the best part of humanity, or what's better? And he says royalty's better. Generally, at the line of thought at the time was the divine right of kings, that kings had some type of noble blood within them. And so he says, well, let's paint God as a king, as the king of heaven, as it's referred to in the scriptures occasionally. And so he represents God to be the king. And I think as we take a look at this, I want you to think about which representation you like better, right? Michelangelo's is much more approachable in a certain extent, kind of mirroring the gestures of Adam, but also looking less kind of less royal, less approachable, where Jan van Eyck's is a little bit more royal. But I think they're both getting at different aspects of the same idea, right? The idea of God is above humanity, right? And I think that's sometimes we kind of think about how approachable God is in the church, which is true, but also we have to consider that God, the creator of the worlds, is way above, right? And so Jan van Eyck is trying to capture that essence as well, right? And so again, just the kind of that connection, that different understanding of the human condition. I wanted to show you a quick clip that goes through the Ghent altarpiece and places it in context in the site. It makes it kind of come alive a little more.
St. Bavo's Cathedral in Ghent still holds the painting, a great altarpiece, that started that revolution. Ghent altarpiece has overwhelmed viewers since it stood complete in 1432. People of the time pronounced it the most beautiful work in Christendom, and its chief creator, Jan van Eyck, was deemed the prince of painters. Today it remains arguably the finest single painting in the world, and of all its many wonders, the one most singled out for praise is the figure of Adam. To early observers, this painted Adam looked like a living being. Paint captures the minute subtleties of flesh. Blood seems to pulse beneath flesh, and the skin of Adam's hands and face is visibly tanned by the sun. One detail intensifies this semblance of animation. Adam raises his big toe so that you can see its underside. The toe seems even to stick out of the stone niche where the figure stands, allowing Adam to appear to step into our world. Remember, this is Adam who sinned, who therefore died, and who as the ongoing consequence of his sin made us all mortal. In the painting, Adam lives again. Resurrected, he strides towards the paradise he lost. The altarpiece was designed and painted for this chapel. Every painted object in the altarpiece is shown reacting to light as if it's a real object here in space. And you can see this immediately in the closed form of the altar, in which all the statues and the two donors, the fights, are all lit exactly from that part of the chapel where the sun streams in and would, if these were real statues, cast shadows and highlights in the way they do in Van Eyck's picture. The closed state is complex. The open state is even more complex. Again, everything in the picture reacts to the light and the space exactly as real figures would in such a situation. But here, because of the nature of the subject, and because he's added this stupendous element of color, because he's multiplied the detail, the level of relations between the world out here and the world of the picture becomes almost infinite. Every one of the jewels, every part of the complex tapestry of this picture is carefully programmed to react to the light that's in this room. So, for example, the figure of Adam, who comes from the left, has highlights in his eye, whereas the figure of Eve, who is shaded in this real space, has no highlights in her eye. There are even certain jewels, ones on the angels on the left, which reflect the actual shape and position of the window which lights them. Today, the actual painting has been removed from this setting. Van Eyck's
I took my wife to see the Ghent altarpiece last year, and it's this kind of quasi religious pilgrimage, I guess, a kind of a desire to go and see it for the last more than 2 decades. I've wanted to go and see it in place, and they've been working on it to restore it, and they just recently opened it, and so we were pretty lucky to be among the first to go and see it when it was opened. And my wife had no idea what to expect. She wasn't really sure why I was so excited to go to Belgium and go to Ghent, specifically in St. Bavo's Cathedral. She wasn't sure what to expect, and then she stood in front of it, and we were there for quite some time, maybe an hour. And as we were leaving, I said, "Well, what did you think?" And because she wasn't prepared for it, she says she was just overwhelmed, and she said that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It's just completely, it just is, enraptures you as you go there. This is what Michelangelo said about Northern Renaissance artists. He says, "But they do have a good attempt at many things, but because of this, they do nothing well." And I think he's suggesting here that Jan van Eyck and other Northern Renaissance artists paint with both a microscope and a telescope, giving us, the finite details of the background and also the finite details of the foreground as well. That I think what he's suggesting is it loses focus because we're just so overwhelmed. Now, you can agree with Michelangelo, you can disagree with him. I certainly have my points of contention with that statement, but it demonstrates the differences of what he's trying to do, right? He's suggesting that aesthetics, that beauty and art should be about simplicity, about trying to not necessarily visually overwhelm the viewer in terms of what to focus on, but the focus and the message should be extremely clear and easy to ascertain. But I think Jan van Eyck has a different kind of take on what art and what beauty should be. He suggests that it should be complex, that people should be able to come back to it and get little details that they may not have noticed before, that it should be enriched. It should be something that pulls us in and has something new to offer each time we view it. Very different kind of view of what art is and the role of the artist. I want us to think about comparing and contrasting this representation of God and humanity. We did this a little bit before, but I wanted you to continue thinking about this, and we'll come back during our Zoom sessions and talk about this in more detail. But thinking about the differences, the similarities and differences between the Ghent altarpiece and the Sistine Chapel, I would argue that the Ghent altarpiece is the Sistine Chapel of the North, right? Meaning that the importance of the Sistine Chapel that we think of as this kind of iconic piece, I think we can think about the iconic piece of the North would be the Ghent altarpiece. I want you to think about which representation you like better and why. And don't necessarily think about it as either all one or all the other, right? You can find kind of some things that you like and some things that you don't, but kind of think about where on the scale would you lean towards. In connecting these, I like this quote by Elder Uchtdorf, and I think that it captures the complexity, the beautiful complexity of both of them. He says, "This is the paradox of man. Compared to God, man is nothing." And I think that's kind of the idea that Jan van Eyck wants us to feel with the Ghent altarpiece, right? This kind of, that God is elevated above us, being able to create the universe, right? Yet, we are everything to God. And I think that's what Michelangelo represents, right? While against the infinite backdrop of creation, we may appear to be nothing, we have a spark of eternal fire burning within our breast, which is what Michelangelo represents with Adam, right? That kind of spark, that life that reaches towards the divine, right? We have the incomprehensible promise of exaltation, worlds without end, within our grasp, right? So again, that idea of reaching, and this God's great desire to help us reach it. And I think both of them represent different sides of the same coin, right? So I think understanding both of them are important to understanding the nature of God and our relationship to Him, right? So I think both of them have something to offer in terms of truth. Thinking about the Northern Renaissance, as I've mentioned, Northern Renaissance just refers to anything really north of Italy, kind of in a generic sense of way. But mainly when we take a look at the Northern Renaissance, we're looking at four major countries: Belgium, Germany, which we've already kind of taken a look at Belgium. We'll take a look at Germany, and then we'll take a look at France, and then also England, which we'll take a look at England a little bit. But we have these four main countries that are influenced by the ideas, the thoughts of humanism, Studia Humanitatis in Italy, and as these ideas start to make their way north, they become inspired, and then it transcends the way that people see the world, where they see themselves, and that inspires them to create art in a very unique, very different sort of way than in the past. I want to take a look at Germany for just a minute, right? So we've taken a look at Belgium. I want to take a look at a piece in Germany. This is another altarpiece. This is known as the Isenheim altarpiece because it is in Isenheim, Germany, right? Grunewald, the artist, was born in Würzburg, Germany, and he painted this. He was commissioned to do this for the Order of St. Anthony in Isenheim. And the Order of St. Anthony mainly functioned as a hospital. But the hospital, we generally think of a hospital very differently today than they thought of at that time. It was very new, very rudimentary in terms of science and medical developments. So mainly when people went to a hospital, the people that were there were more religious clerks, people that were like monks or nuns or something. So the idea of a hospital is more focusing on treating the soul than treating the body, right? So we have to kind of think about that in terms of what in terms of what this was and why this was in Isenheim and why this piece is important, right? St. Anthony, seen on the far right, was said to have performed a miracle that cured a disease called ergotism, or it's also known as St. Anthony's fire, after him for being able to cure it, right? This is a disease caused by food poisoning from eating grain, normally rye at the time, and that's infected with a fungi named called ergot, right? It produces intestinal problems, severe diarrhea, vomiting, gangrene, headaches, hysteria, and it can even cause death, right? But the problem is they didn't really know what was causing it, and so they would continue to eat the infected rye bread. A brotherhood was established in Isenheim to try to cure the disease, but again, not necessarily cure it physically, but more cure it in a spiritual sort of way. Isenheim also had struggles with the plague. The bubonic plague had different kind of waves as it would kind of go throughout Europe, and then it would kind of go away, and then it would come back, right? Similar to what we saw with COVID. We saw the first kind of wave hit, and then it kind of, dissipated a little bit, and then it came back in another wave, and so this is kind of this little waves, and so the plague has a similar kind of effect on that. It hits in the 14th century, but then in the ensuing centuries, it continually comes back. And we see both of these ideas, St. Anthony's fire and the plague, reflected in the Isenheim altarpiece, right? What we see within this, notice how Christ's legs at the bottom are split by the two panels at the, this is known as the deposition, right? Taking Christ off. This is, let me get back to it. This is them taking Christ off the cross. But notice how his legs are split, which people that had gangrene from St. Anthony's fire would recognize the amputation. Right? And that would kind of serve them as a way of saying, I can connect with this. Then we have St. John, we have Mother Mary, sorry, the mouse keeps freaking out, and then Mary Magdalene, right? So again, we've seen this kind of image before, but what we see here is an emphasis on the physical brutality and wounds of Christ, to be able to, for people that are experiencing either the plague or St. Anthony's fire, to be able to see this and say, I can relate to that, right? That's some type of suffering that I can see. On the left, we've seen him before, someone with arrows that are shot through him. This is St. Sebastian. And he's also a patron saint of those infected by disease. And so, again, the idea is that people are coming to this hospital to be cured. And so it'd be nice to have two patron saints that cure diseases there that they can pray to be able to get that kind of relief from suffering, right? So it's no wonder that they appear here. And we've focus here, though, is on the crucifixion, right? The idea of Christ dying for us, and then being able to heal us, take our infirmities upon him, and then he can heal us through this. But notice how Christ is slightly larger than the other images that are here, right? So slightly more than life size. We've seen images like this before. Again, this is John, and this is Mary, Mother Mary, and this is Mary Magdalene. This is the alabaster. This is the oil container. This is a lamb signifying Christ holding a cross, bleeding into a cup for the sacrament. And this is John the Baptist. And so it's kind of interesting. This is a little bit different from what we would see with the Italian Renaissance. The Italian Renaissance more focuses on kind of the realism, what it would look like. This has that element of realism, but there's also some symbolism. John the Baptist was dead by the time Christ was crucified. The lamb here is symbolic. There was no lamb holding a cross at the crucifixion, bleeding into a cup, right? That's all symbolic, which is much more representative of Northern Renaissance art. The Southern Renaissance or Italian Renaissance wouldn't really have that. It would just be much more focused on the realism. And then this is just what it looks like in place, just to give you a sense of the size of it. These figures are meant to be life-size, so as people come in and pray, looking for relief from their illness, they can connect with that, have that kind of connection. Just to focus on a little bit on the on a detailed image. Here we see the crown of thorns, but it's really exaggerated to show you the pain. And we can see the thorns that are still poking through the flesh of Christ, suggesting these wounds. Notice these bruises in him, which would be symbolic of the plague, right? The idea of these skin irritations, these liaisons, or these lesions, as they affect the body. Notice the extreme tiredness in the eyes of Christ, and then the extreme thirst on the lips, as his lips are also discolored. And then these are just a little bit more detailed images of the sores. Notice the sores in St. Anthony. Very different from the kind of the serenity, the balance, the kind of the harmony that we see in Italy. I mean, if you compare Christ's face here to Michelangelo's Christ face in his 1498 version of the Pieta, his early version of the Pieta, we see there's a serenity about Christ, is that death is a release. Here we see that death is this kind of extremely painful thing that seems pretty horrific, right? And again, this is just a detail of the bottom. The feet here, they become this kind of gangrenous color, right? This kind of nasty color that it looks like they become monstrous feet. And then the detail of the hand, we can see the pain as the fingers kind of recoil upwards, and we can see the nail piercing through. So again, focusing on pain, focusing on the suffering. Now, this is what it looks like open. This is what it would look like on Sundays. They would swing these panels open. So again, there's some hinges here, and these swing open. Just going from the left to right, this is the Annunciation, Gabriel coming into Mary to announce that she's going to be the mother of Christ, done within the context of a cathedral, right? Placing this within this Catholic space here, and then Mary kind of jerking back to suggest, wow, this is a lot to ask, but I accept. And then we see this heavenly chorus here, kind of angels singing. We've seen this idea before, Mary, baby Jesus before, and then up at the very top cloud, we see God the Father, right? Up above the mountains here, descending out from the sky, giving this kind of life, giving this light to the world, right? And then over here, at the very far right-hand side, this is the resurrection when Christ comes victoriously from the tomb, knocking over the Roman guards that were there to protect it, to make sure that the Christians wouldn't steal the body and try to make up a story about it. So they were there guarding the tomb, and this is Christ coming forward as the resurrection. So again, what does a resurrected being look like, right? Grunewald's trying to think about what that would look like. It looks like a human being, only better, right? Only more light. And so demonstrating that kind of radiance, that his even his legs seem to have this kind of light within them. He's just shining from within. And then we see the indication of the spear wound and the wounds on the hands and the feet, and even those, they now have become sacred as the instruments of his death. They have this radiance that shines. But the main message here is overcoming the physical limitations of mortality. So again, the focus isn't necessarily on treating the actual physical body that people are suffering from the plague or St. Anthony's fire. This is about treating them and giving them greater hope in what is to be, right? Just a couple other images, just to kind of think about this in connection with the Sistine Chapel again. A different type of representation between Christ, and here we see on the right with the Sistine Chapel, God coming in and directing, right? A very different kind of representation of what that light looks like, what that connection of humanity looks like, what divinity looks like. We can see some of the aesthetics in terms of how they're grappling with this looks very, very different. And then this is what it looks like. There's another layer behind it, and this is what it looks like fully open. The center panel here was a sculpture done by an earlier artist. This is by Nicholas Haguenau. It's the oldest part of the altarpiece, and the other pieces were then added. The other panels were added. On the left, we see St. Anthony going to meet St. Paul. Both of them are hermits, and they distance themselves from the world. We've seen that idea before. In order to get rid of the corruptions of the world, we need to distance ourselves from it. On the right, we see the temptations of St. Anthony as he was off in the wilderness. All these temptations come to him, here represented as demons that overtake him, and it seems as though he's on the brink of extinction or annihilation. And then again, God descends in the background, right, kind of opening up and going to cast off these demons. And so even though we might be surrounded by conflict, anxiety, doubts, suffering, physical limitations of life, right? The idea is that God is there watching over and will lift us up in the end, and that we will become part of Him. And so our suffering, in a sense, will have meaning to it. So just to think about these two works, right? Think about the Ghent altarpiece and the Isenheim altarpiece as representations of this early Northern Renaissance movement, and how Northern Renaissance is going to deal with these ideas of the Renaissance and humanism, the ideas of how to represent the human condition, how to represent our connection with the divine differently from the North, right? So think about the similarities and the differences in how they're representing that.